On the day we were supposed to leave for the city, my fiancé threatened to burn our only way out, just to wait for another woman. I died that night by his hands. But when I opened my eyes, I was back at that same train, same choice. This time I let go of his hand, and made sure he paid for everything. The train was about to leave. The final one headed for the state-run textile factory in the city. If we missed it, we'd be stuck in this sunburnt village forever, tilling fields, collecting firewood, and growing old before we even got the chance to dream. I clutched the hem of my jacket, eyes flicking between the smoke rising from the locomotive and the man who was supposed to be my future. He stood between us and the train like a stone pillar, tall and immovable, his eyes scanning the dirt path that led to the riverbank. "We'll wait for Susan," he said again, voice tight with authority. "She just went to wash her face. She'll be back. She's been gone 20 minutes. Mike Carter shouted behind me, his face red and sweaty. "The conductor's already calling last boarding." "She's not royalty," another boy chimed in. "We can't risk everything for her." But Luke didn't budge. "Her referral letter is with me. She's part of our group." Our group. Luke always made it sound like we were his followers, as though we owed him something. Maybe we did. He was the village chief's only son. Handsome. Educated. He spoke with the self-assurance of someone who always got what he wanted. Including me. We were engaged. He used to brush strands of my hair behind my ear and say, "I'll take you out of this place, Lena. Just wait." I waited. Now, watching him ignore the urgency around us, I realized I'd mistaken possession for love. The train hissed. The wheels groaned. Someone screamed, "They're closing the doors." Panic hit me like a slap. "Drag him on," I shouted. "Now." A few boys surged forward. Luke resisted, yelling Susan's name, but Mike grabbed him by the arms and pulled. I helped push from behind. His feet dragged in the dirt like an old anchor, but he came. That's how we boarded the train, gasping, sweaty, and one person short. Susan didn't make it. As we settled into our seats, the countryside began to blur past the window. No one spoke. We all knew what we had done. Luke sat across from me, his jaw clenched, eyes staring blankly out the window, fists curled tight in his lap. He didn't say a word to me. Not even when the city skyline appeared hours later. Not even on our wedding night, 2 months after we were assigned to the textile factory and our paperwork was processed. That night he said something else instead. As I stood in our tiny dorm room trying to figure out how to light the oil lamp, I felt the rope wrap around my neck. Rough. It smelled like burnt ash and bitter hay. "What?" I gasped. "Don't scream." Luke's voice wasn't the one I knew. It was guttural, heavy, almost otherworldly. His eyes were bloodshot. "It was your cold, poisonous heart," he hissed, tightening the rope, "that kept Susan from getting the chance to leave the village. She should have been here, not you." I kicked, scratched. The world dimmed. "You got to live a good life," he snarled. "But she died giving birth to a child she didn't even want, married to a man old enough to be her grandfather." My vision swam. She was supposed to be in the city. We were supposed to be together. My last thought wasn't about dying. It was about how foolish I had been to ever think I could love a man who never once chose me. I opened my eyes. The sun was blinding. Dust swirled around my ankles. The train was still there, steam hissing, the conductor shouting for last call. Luke stood just ahead of me, glancing toward the river. Susan hadn't returned yet. And I had come back. My heart pounded. I touched my neck. No rope. No bruises. Just the burning imprint of betrayal deep inside me. This time I didn't scream. I didn't drag him onto the train. I stepped back. Let him wait. Let him face the consequences of the choices he made. Luke turned slightly, sensing something different in me. "What's the rush?" he sneered. "You in such a hurry to reincarnate? I've got all the referral letters. If you're so capable, go on. Board it without me." His voice was laced with something else. Fear? Anger? Desperation? I stared at him. I was still reeling from the shock of rebirth, still tasting death at the back of my throat. But I wasn't the same girl anymore. From behind me, a chorus of voices began to rise. "Luke, come on. If we miss this, we're finished. Give us the damn letters." One of the boys moved to snatch the envelope from his hand. Luke struck a match. The small flame flickered dangerously close to the brown paper bundle holding all our hopes. Push me one more time, he said coldly, and we all go to hell together. Everyone froze. You're all so selfish, Luke hissed. From the same village. Some of us even share blood, and you'd abandon Susan like this? Her letter is with me. If we leave now, she has nothing. He wasn't bluffing. He was ready to burn it all. And I was done being scared of fire. The heat pressed down on us like a punishment from the gods, the sharp sting of dust in the air matching the tension between everyone on the platform. Luke's match hovered perilously close to the corner of the envelope containing all our referral letters. No one dared breathe too loudly. Being accepted into the textile factory wasn't just a job. It was salvation. If the letters burned, we'd be condemned to stay in the countryside forever, lost to poverty, our lives buried in rice fields and well water. Luke's grip on power was frightening, and now terrifyingly familiar. As I remembered this moment, the standoff, the desperate faces, the way the sun shimmered on his sweat-slick skin as he played with people's futures like it was a game. And most of all, I remembered that none of them, no matter how furious, had dared to cross him. Not back then. But this wasn't then. Someone grabbed my arm, pulling me back into the moment. Lena, a girl whispered desperately. Talk to your fiancé. Please. You're the only one he listens to. I stared down at the hand on my arm and then up at her tear-streaked face. Only one he listens to? Since when? Luke had never listened to anyone but himself. And Susan. Always Susan. In the past, I'd wasted years trying to be his dutiful bride-to-be. Helping his mother wash clothes. Smiling at every town elder who hinted I was lucky to be engaged to the chief's son. I even defended him when people whispered he was too close to Susan, claiming it was sibling affection, nothing more. I was a fool. My father died in the war, I murmured to the girl. The day I was born, the army sent notice of his death. My mother hemorrhaged from the shock and never recovered. I was raised by my grandfather. Then when he passed, the chief's family took me in. She nodded quickly, not understanding the point. To everyone else, I said, keeping my voice steady, that made them kind. Noble. But they weren't. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I saw the flicker of realization in her eyes. They hadn't taken me in out of compassion. They took me in to secure my father's martyr's pension. To take my house and land while posing as benefactors. And Luke? He never loved me. I was just a golden ticket. The martyr's daughter with the referral spot and government privileges. Luke's voice cut across the silence like a whip. What now, Lena? You gonna stop me too? I looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time since returning to this moment. The sun was behind him, casting a sharp glare around his head like a false halo. No, I said softly. You're right. We really shouldn't leave Susan behind. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to me agreeing with him. Not like this. Lena, Mike started to protest, his face darkening. She's your fiancée, someone else spat. You're really gonna let him hold us all hostage just because of her? What happens if we lose this chance? Another snapped. Who takes responsibility then? You. Their frustration boiled over, and for once it wasn't just directed at Luke. It was aimed at me. I felt it burn under my skin, but I didn't flinch. Their anger was a matchstick compared to what I carried now. Luke sneered. The only reason any of you even got a shot at this factory is because of my dad's connections. One more word and I'll make sure none of you go. He waved the envelope again, proud and provocative. Then he looked at me. Lena's more obedient than the rest of you, he said with a satisfied smirk. You should learn from her. A cold laugh slipped from my lips. Obedient? That word used to sting. Now it made me smile. Let him think whatever he wanted. The truth was, every person standing on this platform had their own reason for being chosen. Most of them through family sacrifice or merit. Luke wasn't the gatekeeper he thought he was. He got in because of me. Because I was the daughter of a martyr. Susan? She'd claimed to be my father's goddaughter. She had the village chief's backing. And I, idiot that I was, never corrected the lie. Not in my first life. But this time I wouldn't stay silent. A sharp whistle blared from the train. The engine puffed angrily. One of the boys cracked. Luke, damn it. Give me my letter. Mike lunged. Luke backed up, his fingers striking the match with a sudden flick. Flames danced. The edge of the envelope began to curl black. Stop. Everyone turned at the voice. Susan. Panting, pale and pristine, she came running down the path, her dress delicately hitched up at the ankles, her hair tied with a ribbon that fluttered behind her. She paused right in front of us and, infuriatingly, pulled out her compact mirror to check her reflection. Like we weren't all on the brink of social annihilation. Susan smiled sweetly. What's the rush? The train doesn't have wings. It's not going to fly away. Luke instantly dropped the match and stuffed the envelope back into his coat like a man hiding treasure. "Now we can go," he said smugly. "Together." Mike's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might break. Susan reached for the envelope, letting her fingers trail against Luke's hand as she took it from him. She even winked. My stomach turned. All this time they'd been sneaking around behind my back, pretending to be brother and sister. And I, pathetic blind Lena, believed them. The whistle screamed again. "Why the hell are we standing around?" Mike shouted, yanking the envelope from Susan's hand and bolting for the train. "Get on before it leaves." We all started running. The world blurred in motion, sweat, dust, panic, screams. The train's metal siding loomed ahead. I ran. Luke and Susan passed me hand in hand, like some tragic lovers from a poorly written novel. Susan turned over her shoulder, finally acknowledging me. "Lena," she said sweetly, "why are you running so slow? Are you still mad at Luke? Don't hold us back on purpose." "What would I be mad about?" I replied, my voice flat as stone. That was the moment the doors slammed shut. Just before I reached them. Just before any of us could leap inside. The train began to pull away. The screeching noise of steel on steel echoed through my ears, but all I felt was silence. I didn't even chase after it. I just stood there and whispered, "I haven't visited my grandfather's grave yet. Maybe it's not so bad missing this train after all." The others stood in stunned disbelief. One girl began to sob. Another punched the ground in rage. Mike turned to Luke, murder in his eyes. "This is all because of her. Because Susan just had to go wash her damn face." Susan's face turned pale. "I didn't mean to," she stammered. Luke turned on me. "Lena," he growled, his eyes bloodshot again. "Stop being so damn passive-aggressive. No one wanted this to happen." My smile was sharp. "You think I'm being passive-aggressive?" The others turned their fury on me. "You're engaged to him," Mike shouted. "We trusted you. That's why we gave Luke the letters in the first place." I nodded slowly. Their anger was understandable. But misplaced. I wasn't going to fight them. Not yet. A few fists flew toward Luke. He held his ground. Didn't even make a sound. Susan shrieked as some of the girls shoved her. Luke snapped. He pulled a pair of scissors from his coat pocket. "Touch her again," he snarled, "and I'll ruin all three of you." The others stepped back, stunned. Luke looked deranged. Susan clung to him, sobbing into his chest. "No need to panic," Luke said coldly. "The train's gone. But I've got other ways into the city." His smirk sent chills down my spine. As I finally understood. Luke had been reborn too. Luke's smirk didn't surprise me. I remembered this moment. How confident he had been the first time too, back when I was still blindly devoted to him. Back when I thought he has a plan, was a good enough reason to forgive everything he did. But this time I wasn't holding on to hope. This time I was watching. "A few days from now," Luke announced, as if revealing a secret only he was worthy of, "a military unit will be passing through. We have our referral letters. The army won't turn us away." Silence rippled across the platform. A boy behind me whispered, "That's true. I think someone mentioned that before." "Wait, how do you know that?" another asked, squinting at Luke suspiciously. Luke didn't even blink. "My father's the village chief. He's good friends with the Southern Military District commander. We'll be fine." I saw the look pass over his face, quick, dark, smug. That's when I knew for sure. He had been reborn just like me. In my last life I remembered how the military convoy did eventually arrive. But Susan hadn't made it aboard. She didn't have the right paperwork, and without the proper documents or a valid identity, they'd left her behind. Luke didn't fight for her then. But this time? He'd struck matches and threatened lives just to buy her more time. One of the boys, Mike, wasn't buying it. He crossed his arms, jaw locked tight. "What are you so proud of, Luke? If you hadn't pulled that stunt with the letters, we'd be in the city by now." Luke's eyes narrowed into slits. Susan, always eager to weaponize sweetness, stepped forward and tilted her head. "Mike," she said softly, "are you saying you don't want to go to the city anymore?" There was a glint in her tone, a veiled warning behind the lace of her voice. Mike flushed but didn't answer. I could tell he wanted to yell, to curse, to say something unfiltered and true. But he held back. His mother was still in the village. We all knew how things worked. Step out of line and the consequences didn't just fall on you. They'd crush everyone you loved. "The military has their own mission," I said, my voice carrying just enough to be heard. "They're not a bus service. They might not let us hitch a ride." Susan flinched. Her hand shot out, grabbing Luke's. She clung to him as though I'd just threatened to tear her away from the life she was desperate to steal. Luke's glare cut to me instantly. "Stop talking nonsense." "I guess we'll see," I said with a smile. I turned and started walking back toward the village, the sun casting a long shadow behind me. In my past life I had clung to him, begged, pleaded, even followed him like a ghost. I was so scared of being left behind in that poor, suffocating village that I didn't see what he was doing right in front of me. But not this time. Let them chase the city. Let them think they've won. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall, and this time I'd be the one pushing. Back at the village, I found the chief yelling in his courtyard, red-faced and furious. When he saw me approaching, his expression twisted with suspicion. "Lena, what are you doing back?" "We missed the train," I said flatly. He dropped his hoe and bolted toward the station without another word. I watched his figure disappear into the distance and let out a slow, deliberate laugh. Run. Scream. Beg. Nothing would save Luke and Susan now. That same night I wrote a letter. It was a formal report to the provincial military office requesting the immediate cancellation of my engagement to Luke, citing Luke and Susan's improper relationship, Susan's false identity using my father's name, the stolen referral letters, the chief's manipulation of village resources for personal gain. Every word I wrote burned. But it was the kind of burn that felt clean. Necessary. I finished the letter with the same precision my father must have once used when writing his last will before going to war. And I sent it. 2 days later, just one day before the military unit was scheduled to pass through, a reply arrived. It was swift. Unmistakable. They would begin an immediate investigation. If my claims were proven true, Luke and Susan's entry permits would be revoked. I smiled. Then without hesitation I burned the reply in my stove. Let no one know what was coming. Let them board that truck. Let them bask in the spotlight. And let it all collapse from the inside. The next morning we returned to the station. Just as planned. The sun scorched the rails, the air thick with heat and anticipation. Susan stood by Luke, her arms folded, her expression smug. She saw me approach and called out in that honeyed voice of hers. "Lena, why are you ignoring me?" she asked sweetly. "Still mad at Luke? You better watch yourself. He might not take you into the city." I stared at her. This girl had worn my father's name like a costume and now threatened me with the benefits it gave her. "You should stop playing games," Luke snapped. "You can stay here if you want. But stop dragging everyone else down." I gave him a curious look. "So angry. I was just wondering how you'd react once they realize your permits are revoked." Luke froze. For a split second he looked shaken. Then his face hardened. "What the hell are you talking about?" Susan looped her arm through his. "Ignore her, Luke. She's jealous." "You're right," I said lightly. "I'm terribly jealous of a woman who faked a connection to a martyr for benefits." Susan stiffened. Luke grabbed my wrist roughly. "Enough." I raised a brow and twisted free. "Touch me again and I'll scream loud enough to bring the entire convoy over." He hesitated. "Smart boy." Susan leaned in again, her tone falsely sweet. "Lena, don't be so bitter. Women should stay soft and gentle, you know? Men are the head of the family. Just let them lead." I turned to her slowly. "Chairman Mao said women hold up half the sky. Are you saying you disagree with the party?" Her face went pale. The crowd hushed. Even in a village where gossip was currency, defying Mao's teachings was dangerous ground. She was playing a dangerous game and she knew it. Luke quickly brushed sweat from her forehead, a public display of affection that turned a few heads. "Say one more thing about Susan," he warned, "and when I meet the general, I'll make sure your quota is revoked." "You're still clinging to that lie?" I asked amused. He looked confused. But before he could reply, the green military truck came into view, rolling toward the station in a cloud of dust. The villagers erupted into cheers. Susan straightened her back and ran forward faster than anyone, Luke right behind her. I stayed behind and watched them shove through the crowd to the front. Let them have their moment. It would be their last. The green military truck ground to a halt in front of the crowd, kicking up a cloud of dust that made the villagers cough and squint. But no one backed away. This was their last hope, their golden ticket to the city. Susan and Luke practically threw themselves at the officer who stepped down from the truck. He was middle-aged, sunburnt and lean, with sharp eyes that scanned the group without expression. "Comrade," Luke called out, pulling a brown envelope from his shirt. "We missed the train, but these are all children of martyrs. My father is the village chief and he's an old friend of your commander. We'd be honored if you'd help us reach the textile factory." His voice was calm and persuasive, as if everything he said was gospel. And he knew how to emphasize the right words. Martyrs, commander, help. Susan pressed closer, her eyes shimmering with well-timed tears. "My father was John Ling," she said, her voice trembling. "He died on the battlefield. I never got to know him, but I've dreamed of coming to the city, to see where he lived, to follow in his footsteps. Please. For his sake." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. John Ling. The war hero who'd taken down a Japanese tank with nothing but explosives strapped to his chest. The legends spoken of in classrooms and town halls alike. A few of the soldiers wiped their eyes. Even the officer looked moved. His gaze softened as he saluted her sharply. "A martyr's daughter," he murmured. That's when I stepped forward. "Susan," I called calmly, loud enough to cut through the awestruck silence. "Are you really John Ling's daughter?" Susan stiffened. The tears on her cheeks suddenly seemed more like moisture squeezed from an onion than anything genuine. She clutched the referral letter tightly in her hands. Luke stepped in front of her, blocking my line of sight. His voice was sharp. "Lena, stop making a scene. Are you jealous?" I ignored him. I turned my attention to the officer. "She's not his biological daughter." Susan flinched. The officer's brow furrowed. "Explain." Luke quickly pulled a sheet from his pocket and shoved it forward. "Here's a signed statement from our village chief. It confirms that Susan is John Ling's goddaughter. Not biological, but as close as family." A few of the villagers spoke up hesitantly. "Yes, we all knew that. She was always close to the martyr's family. She's been with us since she was little." Liars. All of them afraid that exposing Susan would jeopardize their own chances of entering the city. But I wasn't surprised. In my past life they'd done the same. They didn't like Susan, but they feared losing what little hope they had more. The officer turned to me. "You're saying this statement is false?" I looked him in the eye. "No. The village chief wrote it. That much is true." Everyone, including Luke and Susan, looked stunned. Even hopeful. But then I added, "I never said she was my father's goddaughter. I only confirmed who signed the paper." The subtlety hit harder than a slap. The officer's eyes sharpened. He took the document, stepped back and examined it again carefully. After a tense silence he said, "Comrade, please board the truck." He was looking at me. Luke's jaw dropped. "Wait, what about us?" he demanded. The officer didn't even glance at him. "I've never heard of John Ling having a goddaughter." Luke and Susan both paled. They exchanged a brief, panicked look. Their mouths opened but no words came out. "You'd better not be lying," the officer warned, voice steel. "That would be a serious offense. Punishable by imprisonment." I stepped up into the truck, pausing just long enough to look back. Susan was trembling. Luke looked like he'd swallowed poison. And still, the officer let them board. Let them think they'd made it. Because it wasn't over yet. If I had exposed them now, they would have cried and begged and maybe slipped away again through the cracks of sympathy. But if I let them reach the city, parade their lies in front of officials and cameras in the press, then the collapse would be public. Permanent. So I let them sit across from me in the truck, pretending they had won. Susan nestled beside Luke, whispering praises in his ear. Luke gave me a scowl every time our eyes met. They didn't know they were walking straight into a trap I'd already built. The city. Concrete buildings rose like towers of salvation. The air smelled of hot metal and steamed buns. People bustled around with purpose. Susan clutched Luke's hand, eyes wide with wonder. Luke, she gasped, it's amazing. I want. Quiet, he snapped. He'd forgotten momentarily that they weren't important here. That their fancy stories didn't mean money or power. That they came with nothing but paper and lies. Then, as if realizing his vulnerability, Luke looked over at me. You should pay for her registration, he said flatly. I blinked. Why would I? If it weren't for me you wouldn't be here, he said smugly. Mike scoffed and stepped in. All right, enough. Let's just check in at the factory. Others followed his lead, eager to start their new lives and put the train fiasco behind them. Luke clenched his fists but didn't push further. The group was no longer in his control. Sensing the shift, Susan tried to soften the moment. It's okay, Luke. I'm fine. Her voice dripped sugar. We don't need Lena's charity. As they walked ahead, Susan cast a glance back at me. Serves you right, she said under her breath. Inside the factory's administration office, everyone queued to submit their referral letters. Susan rushed to the front, shoving hers at the official. Then she leaned toward me, whispering with a smile, Your dead father turned out to be quite useful. Be sure to thank him for me. I clenched my jaw. You sure about that? Hope you don't regret it. Regret what? She asked, flipping her wrist to show off a shiny watch. See this? Luke bought it for me. You ever wonder where your father's annual compensation went? It's with me. Luke says I'm delicate, that I need to eat better. You look like someone who should be eating bark. The words sank deep. The realization hit like a second death. For years I had wondered how Susan always wore new clothes while the rest of us were pale and thin. I thought her family spoiled her. No. She had been living off the blood of my father's sacrifice. Every gift, every meal, every trinket, paid for with money meant for me. As the factory official reviewed the documents, his brows furrowed. His gaze lingered on Luke and Susan's files. Susan noticed, but she didn't flinch. She laughed. Loud. Bright. Thick. But the others were catching on. Whispers traveled down the line. Mike leaned toward me. Did she really just say that about your father? Before I could answer, a murmur spread across the room. Reporters. At least a dozen journalists had arrived at the factory gates, cameras in hand. Someone had tipped them off, probably the factory's public relations office, eager to promote the arrival of martyrs' children. Susan and Luke pushed to the front of the crowd. Susan beamed and tossed her hair. Hello, everyone. I'm the daughter of John Ling, war martyr. Gasps. Flashbulbs. Admiring questions. Luke stood beside her, chest puffed out. My father is the village chief. Thanks to our efforts, these village children can now serve the nation. He shot me a glare over his shoulder. Say a word and you'll regret it. But I just smiled. Let them shine. The higher they climbed, the longer the fall. The courtyard outside the textile factory was alive with flashes of cameras and admiring murmurs. Susan played her role perfectly, dabbing her eyes as she described the hardships of growing up without a father and how proud she was to carry on his legacy. Ever since I was little, she said, voice trembling just enough to be believable, I dreamed of coming to the city to see where my father once walked, to work like he would have wanted me to. It's not about me. It's about honoring him. Gasps rippled through the reporters. She's so brave. She looks just like a martyr's daughter, doesn't she? Susan offered a soft, humble smile, then leaned toward the cameras as if burdened by modesty. Behind her, Luke placed a steady hand on her shoulder, reinforcing the image of a selfless village chief's son supporting his noble companion. My father worked tirelessly to get Susan her place here, Luke announced. We almost missed this opportunity, but with the military's help, and the guidance of our village leadership, we made it. He cast a smug glance toward me. I didn't blink. Susan saw the flash of my expression, still, watchful, almost amused, and stepped forward quickly. And this is my cousin Lena, she said, grabbing my wrist tightly and dragging me forward. She's just shy. Gets nervous in front of people. The cameras turned toward me and I felt her fingers pinch the inside of my arm hard, just out of sight. Don't speak. Don't steal the spotlight. Don't expose the lie. I smiled faintly and stepped back into the crowd, pretending to let the moment pass. Susan returned to basking in the glow of admiration. Luke leaned in and whispered harshly, Keep quiet. I'll marry you like I promised. Once we're settled in the factory, we'll file the marriage application. I raised a brow. Still dangling that old string? His jaw tightened, but before he could reply, a loud voice boomed from the main building. You two, come with me. The factory supervisor had emerged, followed by several stern-faced officials. His expression was thunderous. Even the journalists turned, sensing something juicy. Susan's smile faltered. She nervously gripped Luke's hand. He looked just as shaken but tried to play it cool. Sir, is something wrong? The supervisor's voice cracked like a whip. Something wrong? You forged documents and pretended to be the children of a national hero. I'd say there's plenty wrong. Gasps erupted from the crowd. One reporter dropped his notebook. Susan's face turned ghost white. No, it's not like that, she stammered. I am a martyr's daughter. I mean goddaughter. The supervisor raised a folder. This was verified by the military district. There's no record of your connection to John Ling. The referral letters you submitted were obtained under false pretenses. Luke jumped forward. Sir, with all due respect, that's slander. We never. The supervisor cut him off. Colluding in false identity to gain state employment is a criminal offense. Do you take the People's Republic for a joke? Susan collapsed to her knees. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to get into the city. Luke's face twisted in panic. He suddenly turned toward me, his voice rising. You did this. Lena, you set us up. I stepped behind one of the reporters and put on my most innocent face. I just couldn't sit back and watch someone suddenly claim to be my father's daughter. Cameras clicked furiously. A young woman in a factory uniform gasped. Wait, she's the real daughter of John Ling? Reporters swarmed. Microphones shoved toward my face. Comrade, is this true? You're really the daughter of the tank hero? How do you feel about these two using your father's name? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The fury in the crowd was enough. Villagers who had once supported Luke and Susan now kept their heads low, eyes averted. Police officers pushed through the gates. Luke Peng. Susan Zhao. You are under investigation for forging official documents, dishonoring a war hero's legacy and defrauding the state. You'll need to come with us. No. It wasn't me. Susan screamed. It was Luke. He told me to. He said he liked me, he said we'd go to the city together. Luke's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you insane? You're going to throw me under the bus. Susan turned her face away, trembling. You forced me. You filthy liar. Mike hissed from the crowd. You two disgust me. The villagers watched as the couple who had strutted in just hours ago now fell apart in front of them. Luke broke down completely. You want to lie now? After everything I did for you? After all the nights Susan slapped him across the face hard. You said you'd protect me. Luke slapped her back without hesitation. The crowd recoiled. Susan fell shrieking in pain. A faint smear of blood colored her lower lip. The officers grabbed Luke and dragged him back. He screamed, You can't arrest me. My referral was real. I'm Lena's fiancé. I'm a martyr's family member. I stepped forward. Luke, what makes you think I would ever still want to marry you? He looked at me like I'd slapped him. You love me, don't you? I shook my head. That was before I died once already. His pupils shrank in horror. He understood. The reporters didn't, but the panic in his eyes was enough to get their attention. They clicked and recorded and shouted questions as he struggled against the officers holding him. I didn't mean it, he screamed. I didn't mean for it to happen. Susan was still on the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. Don't arrest me. Please. Don't take me to jail. As they were shoved into the squad car, the crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Justice, swift and undeniable. A few villagers came over and patted me on the back. I nodded silently. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of their fall. And the beginning of my rise. The factory gates closed behind the squad car, its red lights blinking against the cloud of dust it left behind. Susan's screams had faded into the distance, but the echo of her disgrace remained suspended in the heavy summer air. The villagers dispersed slowly as if waking from a spell. No one looked me in the eye. They had all stood by, complicit in the lie because they feared being left behind. But now they whispered to each other behind their hands, about how they'd always known something wasn't right, how they never truly believed Susan was a martyr's daughter. Cowards. Mike approached me first, his face drawn with a mixture of guilt and admiration. Lena, he muttered, you didn't just save yourself. You saved all of us. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because my fight wasn't over. Susan and Luke might have been dragged away, but the deeper rot was still rooted in the village. Luke's family, the village chief, and the web of lies that fed off my father's death, that needed to be dismantled. So I began again. That night, I sat in my tiny dormitory room under a flickering lamp and compiled the rest of my report. Everything I'd learned over 2 lifetimes. The falsified paperwork, the pension embezzlement, the land transfer forged under my name, and the village chief renting out my inherited property while his own house sat vacant. They raised me, they'd always claimed. But the truth? They'd leached off my name, my father's sacrifice, and the reputation of a hero until there was nothing left of me but a puppet they could parade when it suited them. This time I documented it all. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal. 3 months passed. By day I worked on the factory floor like everyone else. My hands raw from handling machinery, my body aching from the long hours. By night I wrote, organized, revised. And then one morning the workshop supervisor called me into his office. When I entered I froze. Seated behind the desk was an elderly man in a well-pressed uniform, his silver hair combed neatly back, his medals gleaming in the light. I recognized him. Even in this life I remembered his photograph, faded and tucked into the corner of my grandfather's trunk. General Gu. My grandfather's childhood friend. My father's mentor. In my past life Luke had charmed him. Lied to him. Used him. But now. He was staring at me with eyes full of recognition and something else. Regret. Child, he said gently. I've read your report. My throat tightened. I bowed quickly, hiding the sudden sting behind my eyes. I failed your family, he continued. Your grandfather, your father, they were good men. Brave men. I was blind all these years. I thought Luke's family was looking after you. I thought they would protect you. He shook his head slowly, the weight of it crushing. But they protected nothing. They only took. I swallowed. I don't need pity, sir. I only want justice. And you'll have it, he said, voice firm now. I've already contacted the provincial investigators. The village chief will be removed from his post and prosecuted. The properties taken in your name will be returned. As for the compensation stolen, don't worry. The accounts have been frozen. You will be repaid with interest. For the first time the weight on my chest lifted. Not because they would suffer, but because my father's name would no longer be tied to shame and lies. Because the girl who had once been too meek to speak was now the one delivering verdicts. As I stepped outside the sun felt different. It didn't scorch. It warmed. Decades passed. The seasons changed and so did I. I rose through the ranks at the factory, then beyond. I led innovations in textile production, launched my own manufacturing cooperative, and eventually became a respected industrialist. My name, once buried in whispers and betrayal, was now spoken with respect. One spring day, nearly 90 years after that fateful train, I was invited back to the village for a youth event. The new village chief greeted me with a bow, a humble man with kind eyes. The village had changed. The mud houses were replaced with brick homes, and children ran laughing through clean, paved streets. There was even a small museum honoring local martyrs. My father's name was carved on the wall in bold, unshakable strokes. After the event, the new chief pulled me aside, hesitating. There's something I thought you should know before you leave. I nodded. Go on. He sighed. Luke and Susan, after their release they ended up back here. I raised an eyebrow, more curious than anything else. They live at the western edge of the village. Luke drinks most days, screams at anyone who mentions your name. He says the general had high hopes for him, that he was meant for something big. The chief paused. Susan, she's bitter. Angry all the time. Half a year ago, during a fight, she miscarried. I closed my eyes for a moment, not in sorrow, but in silent finality. There was nothing left to say. The next morning I walked alone through the village. Toward the far western path, past the edge of the gardens where the woods thinned, I saw them. 2 old, familiar figures. Luke slouched on a broken bench, clothes ragged, hair streaked with gray. Susan stood in front of him, hands on her hips, shrieking. Oh, now you regret it, she spat. Now that Lena's back, you're acting strange? He shoved her weakly. I know I'm not worthy of her, he muttered. A failure like me deserves to rot with someone like you. You loser, she screamed. No wonder she dumped you. They kept going, trading barbed words like poisoned arrows. They didn't even notice me standing a short distance away. Until Luke finally looked up and froze. Our eyes met. His mouth opened but no words came. Susan followed his gaze. Her face drained of color. Lena, she whispered. I didn't answer. I turned to leave. But Susan stormed after me. Are you happy now? You ruined my life. I stopped and faced her calmly. No, I said. You did that all by yourself. She opened her mouth but Luke grabbed her, yanking her behind him. He faced me, eyes wet. Lena, I know I was wrong. These past years have been hell. I regret everything. I divorced her. Let's start over. Please. Before I could speak, Susan slapped him. Luke hit her back hard. She collapsed, blood blooming beneath her like a spreading ink stain. Panic struck me. Someone get help. I turned to run but behind me I heard him growl. So what if the bastard's gone? Cry all you want. The words chilled me. He had destroyed everything. Love, family, even life itself. And now he was destroying her. Later I would hear that Susan lost the child. That the old widower she had once clung to in secret attacked Luke in a drunken rage, exposing years of betrayal. That Luke, once proud and poisonous, had been beaten so badly he could no longer even call himself a man. But none of that moved me. I sat that night in the courtyard of my childhood home, now restored and vibrant. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I felt free. The wind stirred around me, warm and soft. As if my grandfather was whispering, "It's over now, child." And I believed him. It was strange how peaceful the village had become without the burden of their names pressing down on it. Where once Luke and Susan had walked with haughty pride, their shadows stretching long over others, now they barely registered as whispers. Cautionary tales uttered in hushed voices, never spoken in the presence of children. After the final confrontation, I remained in the village for a few more days. Some people offered me fruit and tea. Others stood awkwardly in the corners of courtyards, clearly unsure how to speak to someone who had once been treated like a walking wallet for a martyr's pension. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't want them. But there was one visit I had to make before leaving. The graveyard on the hillside had always been quiet, shaded by tall pine trees that whispered secrets in the wind. I walked there alone with a single bouquet of chrysanthemums in my hands. My father's grave was no longer covered in moss or forgotten beneath weeds. Thanks to the new village committee and General Gu's intervention, a stone plaque now bore his name, Captain John Ling, beloved son, father and hero of the nation. I knelt beside it and placed the flowers down. I hope you saw it all, I murmured. Every lie burned away. Every thief exposed. The breeze passed gently through the trees and for a moment, I swore I could hear the distant hum of a train, like the one I had once dragged Luke onto, like the one I'd later let leave without me. I closed my eyes. That train had changed everything. It had killed me once. But it had also brought me back. On the last day of my stay, General Gu invited me to dinner at his residence. The home was modest, a single-story tiled house surrounded by fruit trees. He hadn't married and had no children of his own. The revolution didn't leave time for raising a family, he chuckled, pouring tea with careful hands. I spent so much of my youth on the front lines. By the time peace arrived, I didn't know how to stop marching. He handed me a cup. You've done something incredible, Lena. Not just for your father's memory but for every child in this village. What happened with Luke and Susan, it won't happen again. We've issued new guidelines to prevent this kind of fraud. And I've pushed for full restitution of your land, your pension rights and your inheritance. I bowed my head. I didn't do it for revenge. He nodded slowly. But justice feels like revenge to those who've lived without consequence for too long. I smiled faintly. He paused, then added, "There's one more thing. We're naming the new vocational school after your father. And we want you to cut the ribbon." My breath caught. For a moment I saw it all again, not the ceremony but the memory. A young girl standing in threadbare shoes outside the village school, carrying firewood and copying schoolbooks by candlelight while Susan showed off her new satchel and fancy fountain pens. I never thought this day would come. I'd be honored, I whispered. The ceremony was simple but powerful. Children lined the school steps, waving little flags. The crowd clapped as General Gu introduced me, his voice booming with pride. She is not only the daughter of our beloved martyr, Captain John Ling, but also a builder of industry, a model of resilience, and a woman who turned betrayal into brilliance. I stood at the podium looking out over the village that once used me, broke me, buried me. Now it listened. I once thought, I began, that silence was strength. That if I just endured long enough, good things would come. But silence didn't protect me. It nearly erased me. And what brought me back wasn't a miracle or luck. It was memory. The memory of who I really was. And who my father was. I looked at the children. Don't ever let someone else write your story. Especially not someone who wants to steal your name. Applause thundered through the square. As I stepped down, a small girl ran up and handed me a drawing, me holding hands with a man in uniform. "Your papa," she said proudly. "He looks strong." I blinked back tears. He was. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I passed the western edge of the village one last time. Out of habit, not intention. Luke was sitting under a tree alone. A bottle hung limply from one hand, his shirt unbuttoned and stained. His hair was wild, unwashed. There was no fire left in him, only the bitter smog of what he once thought was power. He looked up. For a moment neither of us said a word. "Back to visit the grave?" he slurred. "Yes." He nodded slowly, his gaze unfocused. "Susan's gone." I said nothing. He chuckled without humor. "Ran off with a merchant. Got pregnant again. For it was mine." "It wasn't." I didn't move. "You're not going to say, 'I told you so'?" "No." He laughed, dry and broken. "You're still better than me, huh? Even now?" "No," I said quietly. "Just different." He opened his mouth to say something, then let it close again. I started to walk away. "Lena," he called out hoarsely, "if I had let go of her hand that day, if I had gotten on that train with you, do you think it would have been different?" I paused. And then I said what I had waited 2 lifetimes to say. "You never had to let go of her hand. You just had to hold mine." I didn't look back. I returned to the city the next morning, just as quietly as I'd arrived. No farewells. No public speeches. No more ceremonies. The work waiting for me was vast and relentless. A new textile technology initiative. A grant to support orphan girls from war-torn provinces. And a stack of letters from women, factory workers, farmers, widows, who thanked me not for being a martyr's daughter but for being someone who fought back. For the first time I didn't feel like I was borrowing my father's light. I was standing in my own. And yet some days my thoughts still wandered, not out of pain, not out of longing, but from the need to understand just how close I had come to losing everything. All because I'd once mistaken proximity for love. Weeks passed. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived from the new village chief. It was brief. "Luke Ping passed away last week. He was found beneath the tree where you last saw him. There was no funeral. No family claimed him. Thought you should know." I stared at the letter for a long while. Then I folded it and slid it into a drawer. Not out of cruelty but out of clarity. Luke's chapter in my life had ended the day I stopped asking why he hadn't chosen me. That question no longer mattered. Later that month, I stood at the edge of a construction site where a new worker housing complex was rising. The foundation had been laid. The walls were growing higher. It was my project. My vision. Affordable homes, safe living quarters, clean water access. The lead engineer approached me with a clipboard. "Miss Ling," he said, "there's a bit of a problem." I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "There's a man, claiming he has rights to this land. Says it was sold illegally years ago by the village chief." I tilted my head. "His name? Zhao Yuan. Susan's father. Of course. Even when she disappeared, she left behind the stink of old tricks." I walked to the edge of the site where the man stood, a wiry figure with slicked back hair holding a briefcase full of forged documents and false entitlement. He looked at me and something in his expression faltered. I didn't say a word. 2 security officers stepped forward and handed him the official court order. All property once seized in the name of Martyr John Ling's estate had been returned. Any unauthorized claims were nullified by the central government. Zhao Yuan's mouth opened, then closed. His legacy, like his daughter's, was built on fraud. And it was dissolving in front of him. Go home, I said quietly. He didn't argue. That night, I visited the textile factory where it had all begun. The dormitories still stood, though renovated now. The air smelled less of oil and grease, more of fresh cotton and disinfectant. Girls no older than I'd been once walked down the hallways in crisp uniforms, chattering about ration coupons and movie screenings. I stood outside the dorm room that had once been mine. Room 107. Where I'd lit my first oil lamp. Where Luke had wrapped a rope around my neck. Where I'd died without a scream. The door was open now. Freshly cleaned, waiting for the next assigned worker. A young girl passed me, curious. Are you the new floor manager? I smiled. No. Just someone who used to live here. She nodded solemnly as if I'd said something profound. Perhaps I had. The next morning I made one final visit. The factory museum had recently been expanded. A whole section was dedicated to female workers who had changed the industry. My name was among them, not for being a martyr's daughter but for being an innovator, a leader. The plaque caught my eye. Weina Ling, daughter of Captain John Ling, founder of the National Workers' Cooperative, reformer, advocate, survivor. They tried to bury her story. She planted it instead. I didn't cry. I smiled. And in that moment I felt it, that gentle breeze again. As if my father was right there watching. As if he was proud not because I had survived, but because I had transformed. The world had changed. The textile factory had long expanded into a sprawling industrial complex. The dusty roads I once walked barefoot as a child were now paved with clean asphalt. Young women traveled across provinces to work in the cooperative I had built. Women who reminded me of the girl I used to be. But one thing hadn't changed. Some people never apologized until there was nothing left to gain. One morning, just after breakfast, my secretary handed me a crisp white envelope. It's from your home village, she said. No return name. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short letter, written in shaky handwriting. Lena, I know I am the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to tell you the truth while I still have time. Susan didn't love Luke. She loved what Luke promised. And Luke, he never loved her. He loved your name. I watched them both destroy themselves trying to steal a life that was never theirs. I was too afraid to stand up for you then. Too scared to lose what little I had. I've lived with shame ever since. A coward from the village. I stared at the signature line. But I already knew who had written it. Mrs. Ping, Luke's mother. The woman who had once called me dead weight in her courtyard while polishing silverware paid for by my father's compensation. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my drawer. Not out of spite, but because I had no more space in my life for apologies carved from guilt rather than growth. That spring, I was invited to speak at a national education summit in Beijing. The topic, turning inheritance into impact. As I stood before a room of politicians, business leaders, and students, I thought about what they expected me to say. That I was proud to be a martyr's daughter. That I had built an empire from a tragedy. That forgiveness had set me free. But I told them the truth instead. I didn't survive because I was strong, I said. I survived because I finally stopped begging people to recognize my worth. I stopped knocking on doors that would never open for me and built my own foundation instead. Silence followed. Then thunderous applause. I looked at the front row. General Gu sat among them, a handkerchief in hand, discreetly dabbing his eyes. He'd aged even more over the last year, but his presence was still steady. After the event, he pulled me aside. You've done more with your pain than most ever do with their privilege, he said. I wish your father could see it. He does, I said quietly. I know, he nodded. I see him in you. A week later, I received a call from a nurse in a rural hospice. Miss Ling, she said gently, you're listed as the emergency contact for Susan Zhao. I nearly laughed out loud. I never listed myself as her contact, I said. I understand, the nurse replied, but she insisted on naming you. She says you're the only person who ever really saw her. I hesitated, then sighed. Where is she? The facility was tucked in a quiet mountain town. Humble. Clean. Susan lay in a cot by the window, barely recognizable. Her hair had thinned. Her skin was pale and paper-thin. There was no defiance in her eyes anymore, just emptiness and flickering shame. When she saw me, she tried to smile. "Lena," she rasped. "You don't look like someone who called me husks and bark," I said dryly, pulling a chair to her bedside. She let out a wheezing laugh. "Still sharp. Still alive." She looked out the window. "I'm not dying. Not officially. But everything in me already did." "I'm not here to argue," I said. She nodded slowly. "I don't want your forgiveness. Just your understanding." I crossed my legs. "Say what you need to." She closed her eyes for a long time before speaking again. "I wasn't lying when I said I wanted the city. I just didn't know how to get there on my own. So I latched on to Luke. Then to your name. I convinced myself it wasn't stealing, it was just borrowing until I earned it." I said nothing. "I envied you," she whispered. "Not your father. Not your house. You." That startled me. "You were strong even when you were silent. People respected you. Even Luke in his own twisted way feared you. I thought if I could take what was yours, I could become that strong too." I looked at her, barely more than a shadow of the woman who once mocked me in designer shoes bought with stolen money. "And did you?" I asked. She laughed softly. "No. All I did was break myself trying." I stood. "I'll cover your hospice bills," I said. Her eyes widened. "Not for you," I clarified. "For the girl you once were, before the lies." Then I left. That night, I returned to the city and pulled out an old photograph, me as a child holding a toy soldier, my grandfather beaming beside me. I placed it in a new frame and set it on my desk beside a plaque that read, "Director of National Textile Alliance. Lena Ling, industrial pioneer, survivor, builder." But underneath it all, I was still something simpler. A girl who boarded the wrong train, died for it, and still came back stronger. The seasons cycled faster after that. There was always something to manage. New textile automation policies, expanding the cooperative to rural schools, restructuring maternity benefits for female factory workers. But the busier I became, the more I realized I no longer carried my father's name like a shield. It had become something else. Not a burden. Not a banner. Just mine. One evening, as I walked through the quiet hallways of the National Textile Alliance headquarters, I passed a wall lined with photographs of our founding leaders. I stopped in front of one, an image taken during the cooperative's first year. There I stood, a young version of myself, chin lifted, eyes weary but determined. Next to me in the photo, the earliest recruits, women from my village, many of whom had once turned their backs on me. I had taken them in anyway. Not for them, but because I knew what it meant to have no place to go. A small plaque beneath the photo read, "Founded by Lena Ling, born of ashes, built on steel." That spring, I was invited back to the village once more, not for a speech or a ceremony this time, but for the unveiling of a new community library. It had been built on the land once illegally seized by the village chief. The new structure gleamed with large glass windows and red bricks. Inside, shelves were filled with books on science, history, and economics. A small memorial display stood in the entrance hall, featuring local heroes. My father's military badge was mounted in the center. I walked past it quietly and noticed a portrait on the wall. Me standing beneath the textile factory's old chimney, one hand resting on a stack of ledgers, the other pointing to blueprints. The caption beneath read, "The girl who took the train that left her behind, only to build the road everyone else walks now." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but because the symmetry of it all was finally clear. I had been silenced, used, killed in one life and metaphorically in another. And still I had returned, not to beg, not to prove anything. Just to stand tall. And to be seen. I stepped outside to find several children playing near the village well. One girl, maybe 10 or 11, looked up and called out, "Auntie Lena, can I show you my drawing?" She ran over and handed me a crumpled piece of paper. It was a train. Beneath it, a girl with a red ribbon in her hair stood beside a field of sunflowers, smiling. "That's you," she said proudly. "And the train isn't leaving you behind anymore." I knelt down beside her. "You know," I said, "even when that train left me, I wasn't really left behind." She looked puzzled. I pointed to the field of sunflowers. I just hadn't bloomed yet. That night, I lit a candle in front of my father's portrait. No more speeches. No more reports. No more bitterness. Only quiet. Only peace. The kind I had carved with my own hands, brick by brick, decision by decision. I closed my eyes and whispered the final truth of it all. Even the rope he wrapped around my neck couldn't choke the future out of me. Then I stood and walked back into the light. The